Before we start, I want to thank, well, first of all, thank you to Provincetown. We just, in a way, we can't believe we're still here in our third season, and we owe so much to all the people in the community and the businesses that have been so generous to us. But tonight, I want to thank, in particular, Russell Braun, Mark Westman, and the Inn at Cook Street, all of which are putting up our special guests for the weekend. And tonight, I also want to thank somebody I haven't thanked in previous years. I want to thank Tobin Anderson, known on your programs as M.T. Anderson. This is the third year in a row that we have had what I would call a themed classical concert with curated pieces of music married to readings from literature, and it's really, I collaborate a tiny bit, but this is really the brainchild and the labor of love of Tobin Anderson, and he does it for free because he's crazy and loves it, finds the musicians, puts together the program, and by the way, I proofread, if a bit hastily, the program notes. They are incredibly entertaining as well as educational, so I urge you to read those program notes. But thank you, Tobin, again, and we hope we're already talking about next year's program. So I think that's it for now, and without further ado, please welcome the Aurea Ensemble from Providence for Music for Barns.
John James Audubon, from the Ornithological Biography. When my wife, my eldest son, then an infant, and myself were returning from Pennsylvania to Kentucky, we found it expedient, the waters being unusually low, to provide ourselves with a skiff to enable us to proceed to our abode at Henderson. We glided down the river, meeting no other ripple of water than that formed by the propulsion of our boat. Leisurely we moved along, gazing all day on the grandeur and beauty of the wild scenery around us. The days were yet warm, the sun had assumed the rich and glowing hue which at that season produces the singular phenomenon called there Indian summer. When I think of those times and call back to my mind the grandeur and beauty of those almost uninhabited shores, when I picture to myself the dense and lofty summits of the forest that everywhere spread along the hills and overhung the margins of the stream, unmolested by the axe of the settler, when I see that no longer any aborigines are to be found there, and that the vast herds of elk, deer, and buffalo which once pastured on these hills and in these valleys, making for themselves great roads to the several salt springs, have ceased to exist, when I reflect that all this grand portion of our Union, instead of being in a state of nature, is now more or less covered with villages, farms, and towns, where the din of hammers and machinery is constantly heard, that the woods are fast disappearing under the axe by day and the fire by night, that hundreds of steamboats are gliding to and fro over the whole length of the majestic river, forcing commerce to take root and to prosper at every spot, when I see the destruction of the forest and civilization transplanted into its darkest recesses, when I remember that these extraordinary changes have all taken place in the short period of 20 years, I pause, wonder, and although I know all to be fact, can scarcely believe its reality. Whether these changes are for the better or for the worse, I shall not incline to say. And we should note that Audubon, when on sketching expeditions, often shot upwards of 100 birds a day.
From Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. The early summer days on a farm are the happiest and fairest days of the year. Lilacs bloom and make the air sweet and then fade. Apple blossoms come with the lilacs, and the bees visit around among the apple trees. The days grow warm and soft. School ends, and children have time to play and to fish for trouts in the brook. Avery often brought a trout home in his pocket, warm and stiff and ready to be fried for supper. Now that school was over, Fern visited the barn almost every day to sit quietly on her stool. The animals treated her as an equal. The sheep lay calmly at her feet. Around the 1st of July, the workhorses were hitched to the mowing machine, and Mr. Zuckerman climbed into the seat and drove into the field. All morning, you could hear the rattle of the machine as it went round and round, while the tall grass fell down behind the cutter bar in long green swaths. Next day, if there was no thunder shower, all hands would help rake and pitch and load, and the hay would be hauled to the barn in the wagon, with Fern and Avery riding at the top of the load. Then the hay would be hoisted, sweet and warm, into the big loft, until the whole barn seemed like a wonderful bed of timothy and clover. It was fine to jump in and perfect to hide in. And sometimes Avery would find a little grass snake in the hay and would add it to the other things in his pocket. Early summer days are a jubilee time for birds. In the fields, around the house, in the barn, in the woods, in the swamp, everywhere, love and songs and nests and eggs. From the edge of the woods, the white-throated sparrow, which must come all the way from Boston, calls, "Oh, Peabody, Peabody, Peabody." On an apple bough, the phoebe teeters and wags its tail and says, "Phoebe, Phoebe." The song sparrow, who knows how brief and lovely life is, says, "Sweet, sweet, sweet interlude, sweet, sweet, sweet interlude." If you enter the barn, the swallows swoop down from their nests and scold. "Cheeky, cheeky," they say. In early summer, there are plenty of things for a child to eat and drink and suck and chew. Dandelion stems are full of milk. Clover heads are loaded with nectar. The Frigidaire is full of ice-cold drinks. Everywhere you look is life.
From S.J. Perelman, Acres and Pains, his account of running a highly unsuccessful gentleman's farm. If you tossed a cigarette out of a plane 30 miles west of LaGuardia Airport, it would probably hit the roof of an enormous red barn decorated with hex symbols, and just between you and me and the compost, that would be okay with me. For the past 15 years, until a week ago, this hippodrome served superficially as a receptacle for old newspapers and fly screens, but actually is the focus of a dream. Whenever I was pressed to convert it into a studio, playroom, or summer theater, one man tried to rent it for a stocking factory, I assumed a crafty, slow-witted peasant smile. In my mind's eye, I saw the stalls lined with sleek purebreds gorging themselves on alfalfa, the great silo bursting with high-protein hay. To my fevered senses, no imported perfume could rival the bouquet of a heifer placidly chewing her cud. Every moment I wasn't sleeping, I greedily devoured government bulletins detailing the manufacture of smearcase and clabber. I could almost hear the rich golden milk gurgling in the pails. I grew faint with desire, picturing myself at eventide in the North 40, surrounded by lowing kine. I could have gone on dreaming indefinitely without ever disbursing a kopeck had it not been for lowing kine, the advertising man next door. For some obscure reason, this worthy unexpectedly tired of feeding 140 pedigreed jerseys and put them under the hammer. Trumpeting the historic phrase, "I'm just looking for a few small family cows," I donned my most evil-smelling tweeds and raced to the auction. By the time I returned home, my giddiness had subsided, leaving me weak and trembling with remorse. I was maundering through an incredible fable about having won a couple of calves at a raffle when a van puffed up the incline bearing my moolies. My dream girl turned a dusty vermilion and uttered a choking sound. I offered to explain to her how milking would strengthen her fingers and broaden her psyche, but the poor creature, irrational as only her sex can be, caught up a nest of flower pots and was trying to get in my range. I spent the night doubled up in a feed bin, listening to the mammoths eating me into bankruptcy and endlessly adding up columns of figures. To date, they have tucked away 12 bales of hay, 5 blocks of salt, and 3 bushels of a mealy substance weighed out on jeweler's scales. With reasonable economy, every glass of milk I throw over a lip in the next season should cost in the vicinity of $40. I wouldn't mind particularly, except for a disquieting thought dropped by a doctor the last time we conferred. "Don't quote me," he said, meditatively stroking my purse, "but I believe you're allergic to milk. And honey, he's not kidding."
from 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley. At 60 miles per hour, you could pass our farm in a minute on County Road 686, which ran due north into the T intersection at Cabot Street Road. That intersection perched on a little rise, a rise nearly as imperceptible as the bump in the center of an inexpensive plate. From that bump, the earth was unquestionably flat, the sky unquestionably domed, and it seemed to me when I was a child in school learning about Columbus that in spite of what my teacher said, ancient cultures might have been onto something. No globe or map fully convinced me that Zebulon County was not the center of the universe. Because the intersection was on this tiny rise, you could see our buildings a mile distant at the southern edge of the farm. A mile to the east, you could see 3 silos that marked the northeastern corner, and if you raked your gaze from the silos to the house and barn, then back again, you would take in the immensity of the piece of land my father owned. 640 acres, a whole section, paid for, no encumbrances, as flat and fertile, black, friable, and exposed as any piece of land on the face of the earth. If you looked west from the intersection, you saw only this: 2 sets of farm buildings surrounded by fields. In the nearer set lived the Ericksons, who had daughters the ages of my sister Rose and myself, and in the farther set lived the Clarks, whose sons, Lauren and Jess, were in grammar school when we were in junior high. Harold Clark was my father's best friend. He had 500 acres and no mortgage. The Ericksons had 370 acres and a mortgage. Acreage and financing were facts as basic as name and gender in Zebulon County. Harold Clark and my father used to argue at our kitchen table about who should get the Erickson land when they finally lost their mortgage. I was aware of this whenever I played with Ruthie Erickson, whenever my mother, my sister Rose, and I went over to help can garden produce, whenever Mrs. Erickson brought over some pies or donuts, whenever my father loaned Mr. Erickson a tool, whenever we ate Sunday dinner in the Ericksons' kitchen. I recognized the justice of Harold Clark's opinion that the Erickson land was on his side of the road, but even so, I thought it should be us. For one thing, Dinah Erickson's bedroom had a window seat in the closet that I coveted. For another, I thought it appropriate and desirable that the great circle of the flat earth spreading out from the T intersection of County Road 686 and Cabot Street Road be ours. 1,000 acres. It was that simple.
From Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio. Departure. Young George Willard got out of bed at 4 in the morning. It was April, and the young tree leaves were just coming out of their buds. The trees along the residence streets in Winesburg are maple, and the seeds are winged. When the wind blows, they whirl crazily about, filling the air and making a carpet underfoot. George came downstairs carrying a brown leather bag. His trunk was packed for departure. George went into the silent, deserted main street. The east was pink with the dawn, and long streaks of light climbed into the sky, where a few stars still shone. The westbound train leaves Winesburg at 7:45 in the morning. George came down the little incline from the new Willard house at 7 o'clock. Tom Willard carried his bag. The son had become taller than the father. On the station platform, everyone shook the young man's hand. More than a dozen people waited about. Then they talked of their own affairs. When the train came into the station, George felt relieved. He scampered hurriedly aboard. Helen White came running along Main Street, hoping to have a parting word with him, but he had found a seat and did not see her. When the train started, the conductor punched his ticket, grinned, and, although he knew George well and knew on what adventure he was just setting out, made no comment. The conductor had seen 1,000 George Willards go out of their towns to the city. It was a commonplace enough incident with him. After George counted his money, he looked out of the window and was surprised to see that the train was still in Winesburg. The young man, going out of his town to meet the adventure of life, began to think, but he did not think of anything very big or dramatic. Things like his mother's death, his departure from Winesburg, the uncertainty of his future life in the city, the serious and larger aspects of his life did not come into his mind. He thought of little things. Turk Smollett wheeling boards through the main street of his town in the morning. A tall woman, beautifully gowned, who had once stayed overnight at his father's hotel. Butch Wheeler, the lamplighter of Winesburg, hurrying through the streets on a summer evening and holding a torch in his hand. Helen White, standing by a window in the Winesburg post office and putting a stamp on an envelope. The young man's mind was carried away by his growing passion for dreams. One looking at him would not have thought him particularly sharp. With the recollection of little things occupying his mind, he closed his eyes and leaned back in the car seat. He stayed that way for a long time, and when he aroused himself and again looked out of the car window, the town of Winesburg had disappeared, and his life there had become but a background on which to paint the dreams of his manhood.
Country House by Maxine Kumin. After a long presence of people, after the emptying out, the laying bare, the walls break into conversation. Their little hairlines ripple, and an old smile crosses the chimney's face. The same flies drawn to the window panes buzz endlessly from thirst. Field mice coast down a forgotten can of bacon fat. 2 clocks tick themselves witless. October, clutching its blankets, sidles from room to room, where the exhausted doors now speak to their stops, 4 scrubbed stones of common quartz. They are gone, those hearty moderns who came in with their plastic cups and spoons and restorative kits for stripping the woodwork, torn between making over and making do. At their leave-taking, the thin beds exhale. The toilet bowl blinks, its eye full of purple antifreeze. As after a great drought, the earth opens its holes to raise the water table, the stairs undo their buttons, the risers, each an individual, slip out of plumb. Seams, pores, and crazings unpucker, making ready for frost. A tongue of water circles the cellar wall and locks itself in. Soon the raccoon will come with his 4 wise hands to pick the carcass, and the salt-worshipping porcupine will chew sweat from the porch swing. The red squirrels will decamp, the last litter of mice go under. Caught and fastened, this house will lean into the January blizzard, letting its breath go sour, its rib cage stiffen.
William Stafford, The Farm on the Great Plains. A telephone line goes cold. Birds tread it wherever it goes. A farm back of a great plain tugs an end of the line. I call that farm every year, ringing it, listening still. No one is home at the farm. The line gives only a hum. Some year I will ring the line, on a night at last the right one, and with an eye tapered for braille from the phone on the wall, I will see the tenant who waits, the last one left at the place. Through the dark, my braille eye will lovingly touch his face. Hello, is mother at home? No one is home today. But father, he should be there. No one is here. But you, are you the one? Then the line will be gone, because both ends will be home. No space, no birds, no farm. Myself will be the plain, wise as winter is gray, pure as cold posts go, pacing toward what I know. Robert Frost, Out, Out. The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. And from there, those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset far into Vermont. And the saw snarled and rattled as it ran light or had to bear a load, and nothing happened. Day was all but done. Call it a day, I wish they might have said, to please the boy by giving him the half hour that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside him in her apron to tell them, supper! At the word, the saw, as if to prove saws knew what supper meant, leapt out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand. However it was, neither refused the meeting. But the hand. The boy's first outcry was a rueful laugh as he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal, but half as if to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all, since he was old enough to know, big boy doing a man's work, though a child at heart. He saw all spoiled. Don't let him cut my hand off. The doctor when he comes. Don't let him, sister. So, but the hand was gone already. The doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath, and then the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart. Little, less, nothing. And that ended it. No more to build on there. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs.
Let Evening Come by Jane Kenyon. Let the light of late afternoon shine through chinks in the barn, moving up the bales as the sun moves down. Let the cricket take up chafing as a woman takes up her needles and her yarn. Let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe abandoned in long grass. Let the stars appear and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to air in the lung, let evening come. Let it come as it will, and don't be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come. The Long Voyage by Malcolm Cowley. Not that the pines were darker there, nor mid-May dogwood brighter there, nor swifts more swift in summer air. It was my own country, having its thunderclap of spring, its long midsummer ripening, its corn horse-stiff at harvesting, almost like any country, yet being mine. Its face, its speech, its hills bent low within my reach, its river birch and upland beach were mine, of my own country. Now the dark waters at the bow fold back like earth against the plow. Foam brightens like the dogwood now at home in my own country.